Chapter 19 Journey to the Ice Palace. They walked the rest of the way in silence, not feeling the need to speak. As they walked, the clouds began to clear and the sun came out. In the sun, the snow and ice glistened. They both had to squint in the brightness. They passed by clusters of trees with icicles hanging from them and large rock faces with jagged peaks. They came to the top of a hill. Below them was a valley, and then beyond that was a steep climb up the rocks to a palace made out of the ice. It sparkled in the sunshine. The birds led them down through the valley and along the vast sheets of ice. As they got closer, they could see an entrance where the ice met the rock face. It looked dark and scary. When they got to the entrance, they stopped and looked at the birds, who had both taken a perch on a large boulder. "Thank you, birdies, for showing us the way," Sarah said. She looked into the darkness of the ice caves. "I'm not going in there," Kenny said firmly, backing up slightly. The birds looked back at them, tilting their heads as though they were sizing them up. They chirped at them and then turned their heads to the cave. They chirped again and then hovered in the air. Then they flew into the cave. "What are you doing?" Sarah asked. Two chirps came in reply, and then they could see a red and blue glow from within the cave. "Oh!" Sarah exclaimed. "I still don't want to go in there," Kenny said hesitantly. "Why not? You're a bear," Sarah said, pointing out the obvious. "Oh yeah," Kenny replied sheepishly. As they entered the tunnels, the red and blue lights from the birds created a strange effect with the ice, and together they turned the tunnels into a purple glow. They spent what seemed like hours in the caves and then in the tunnels, twisting and turning, gradually climbing higher and higher. There were forks in the road, dead ends, and so many ways to get lost. If it wasn't for the birds, they would have never found their way. No wonder it was a secret entrance. The birds came to a stop at a great sheet of ice, blocking their way. Sarah and Kenny caught up. They both looked at the wall. "Aw!" exclaimed Kenny the bear with exasperation, sitting back on his hind legs. "It's a dead end! I thought you said the birds knew the way." The birds cheeped back. Kenny looked at them. "What?" "Do you think they are trying to tell us something?" Sarah asked. "I don't know," Kenny replied grumpily. "Anyway," his voice trailed off as he saw a line in the ice. "Wait a minute," he said more excitedly, trying to follow the line, but realizing a bear's paw was a bit bigger and more clumsy compared to a little boy's hand. "What is it?" Sarah asked, trying to look. "It's a square that has been carved into the ice." Kenny put his paw on the square and it slid in. It kept on sliding. It was an opening. "That looks like we can fit through," Sarah said, jumping up and lifting herself into the ice wall. "How am I supposed to do that?" Kenny asked. "Look at me." "Can't you change back?" Sarah's voice asked. "I don't know how to," Kenny replied, getting worried. Was he going to be a bear forever? Sarah's head reappeared out of the wall. "Why don't you try thinking about turning back?" she suggested. Kenny closed his eyes and thought as hard as he could about turning back. He scrunched up his forehead as he did. He opened his eyes and he was still a bear. The two birds were hovering in front of him. "What?" he shouted at them. "Why can't I just turn back into being Kenny?" he roared. The sound echoed around the tunnels, making the ice shake. Suddenly, he felt a strange sensation, like he was shrinking. Within seconds, he was once again a young boy, wearing the same clothes he had been before he turned into the bear. "Maybe you needed to really want it," Sarah giggled. "Oh, be quiet," replied Kenny. He turned to the birds. "But thank you, birds." The two birds stared back and then flew up to the entrance to the wall where Sarah was. "Hurry up," she called down to Kenny. "This ice is cold." She shuffled around and slid herself through the perfectly shaped square tunnel. The birds followed her, and behind them, Kenny jumped up and eased his way through the wall of ice. On the other side, they entered a large circular room with stone walls and steps wrapping around the walls. She looked up into the darkness. She couldn't see the top. "This must be right under the castle," Sarah said, her voice echoing. She clasped her mouth, realizing how loud her voice was. Kenny jumped and landed with a thud. "Ouch!" he exclaimed loudly. Then he let out a "whoops," which also bounced around the room for a few seconds. "Shh," Sarah said in a whisper, but it also whooshed around the room. "We have to be quiet," she whispered, barely making a sound. Kenny nodded in agreement. "Oh, look!" he exclaimed a second later, running over to a hole in the wall. Sarah smacked her hand against her forehead and sighed. There was no hope for her brother. Kenny reached into the hole and held up something over his head. It was the sapphire orb. "Oh my gosh," Sarah whispered. "It's the sapphire orb." "I know," he replied. "Why is it here, under the castle?" "It looks like it was a great place to hide it, right underneath them, where they wouldn't think to look," Sarah replied with a smile. She opened the flap of Simon's satchel that she had been carrying and looked at the ruby orb. Kenny handed her the sapphire orb, and as she put it into the satchel, both of the orbs started to glow. Sarah thought about Simon and sighed. Before she started to get too sad, she handed the bag to Kenny and said, "We should probably start climbing," as she pointed to the stairs. "Why do I have to carry it?" Kenny complained. "Because I carried it all the way here," Sarah replied before turning and following the birds. Kenny accepted the bag reluctantly and followed behind. They climbed and climbed. As they got higher, Kenny peered over the edge and could only see the blackness of nothing below, but he knew it was a hard floor at the bottom. He moved as far away as he could from the edge of the steps and kept his right hand on the wall as they kept climbing. They reached the top, out of breath and exhausted. At the top of the steps was a landing and a large wooden door in front of them. The two birds settled on the floor next to them. After resting for a few minutes, Sarah stood up and pressed her ear against the door. She couldn't hear anything. She reached for the large metal ring. "What are you doing?" Kenny whispered, tapping Sarah on her shoulder. "Seeing what's on the other side, unless you want to go all the way back down there," she said, nodding her head to the darkness behind and below them. "Okay," Kenny agreed. Sarah put her hand on the metal ring and turned it. A latch clicked open and she pulled the door gently towards her. She waited to see if there was a creak. There was nothing. They both peered through the crack in the doorway. They could see a large area that looked like a courtyard, all made of stone. There were metal altars with fires burning in them, and 4 guards in the distance. The guards wore the same black capes, clothes, and gas masks as they had seen on the creatures by the lake, but these ones looked a lot larger. Gradually, everything started to fade. Kenny and Sarah looked at each other. They were waking up.